Light glows from my soul and my skeleton.
What's going on, everyone? Today we're going to be talking about the Lumix S5, specifically coming from the Lumix GH5. This isn't really going to be a review about the camera or anything like that. More just about what this camera is and who I think it's really for. So the first thing that you should know is that I've been a GH5 user. I'm recording right now on my GH5. I still love my GH5. My GH5 is going absolutely nowhere anytime soon. But just for some context, I've had it for about maybe 3 years now, give or take. And then before that, I had the Lumix G7. That was kind of the camera that got me into everything. And as some of you might already know, usually the first camera that you pick up, it's probably the brand that you're gonna stick with for a while. But regardless, I beat the hell out of the G7. Was a fantastic camera. Somehow it's my most viewed video on YouTube. And it was a great camera. Still is a great camera. If you're looking to pick something up for sub $500 and you wanna be able to shoot 4K, wanna be able to take some pictures, it still is a pretty phenomenal camera for the price. The GH5 was the camera that I wanted to buy when I bought the G7, but obviously I was just getting into photo and video. It didn't make sense for me to purchase a really expensive camera when I was just getting into everything. And my monitor's just turned off. But even though this is probably my favorite camera right now, to me, this is not a replacement to the GH5. And let me tell you why. Even though this has been the camera that I grab, the second part that I didn't tell you is the GH5 is sitting in the same bag where this is at. Most of the time I'm still bringing the GH5 with me, even though I might be using this most of the time. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So to me, the GH5 is still a very video-centric camera. And yes, of course, it is a hybrid camera. You can take photos with it. But throughout my 3 years of having the GH5, I realized the one thing that I wasn't really doing that much was taking pictures. And that was one thing that I didn't realize that I missed or liked doing because I didn't really I was taking pictures with my G7, but I just was so more committed to video that I wasn't taking as many pictures with the GH5. And I would take some pictures with the GH5 and I would never do anything with it because I wasn't comfortable with them. It would either be too grainy or honestly the image just wasn't really there. And that's just in part of the fact that it's a micro four thirds sensor, and that's just where its shortcoming is. And that's not to say that you can't get good photos with the GH5. It just means that you have to do extra work to get that photo to look good. For example, here's a couple of pictures that, it's from a very similar camera. It's from a G9, that or it could be from my GH5. I'll pop on the screen whether it's from the G9 or the GH5. So it is possible to get nice pictures from the GH5. Let me just put it this way. You don't go out and buy the GH5 because you want to take pictures. You buy the GH5 because you're going to do video. And if we're going to start comparing things from the S5 to the GH5, there's already a lot of things that the GH5 actually has that the S5 doesn't. That includes a full-size HDMI port. You can do unlimited video recording in any mode that you're shooting in on the GH5, 1080 24, 1080 30, 60, 4K, every single one that you can put on there. In body, you can record with no time limit on it whatsoever. The S5, you can record unlimited in any 1080, but as soon as you pop it into 4K 60, you have a 30-minute recording time limit, and that's just because of the heat. The GH5 also has all-eye recording, and although I don't use it all the time, there were definitely a handful of times where it came in super, super handy. So this one's kind of funny because it is true, but at the same time, not entirely. The GH5 has no crop on any of your video modes that you're shooting on. So if you're shooting in 1080, you hop to 4K, it's going to be the same composition that you had set the very first time. On the S5, it does have a crop. So if I go from 1080 and it's on a tripod and I go to 4K, it's going to crop in. The reason that I said it's not really true is the fact that it is a micro four thirds sensor. So, it already is, a crop sensor and it's pushed in further. But you have the advantage of you can swap really quickly from 1080 to 4K and you don't have to worry about it punching in or anything. So everything that I just said makes the GH5, in theory, a better video camera. And it doesn't mean that the S5 can't do great video. I've been extremely satisfied with what the S5 pushes out. I absolutely love the fact that they put Vlog in this. It's just such an interesting camera, and as Gerald Undone said actually perfectly, it's just interesting that this cannibalizes the rest of the S line. But I think there's a reason for that. I really think that this camera would not exist if the S1 and the S1R sold really, really well. Because if those cameras were doing really hot, why would they make this camera? And yes, the S1H is out there and it's a phenomenal camera. And yeah, everybody makes a big deal that it's Netflix certified, but take that away, it is still a phenomenal video camera. That definitely to me seems more like the GH5 predecessor, if you will. But it's also $4,000. One of the biggest amazing things about the GH5, about the entire camera when it first came out, was its affordability, and still today it's affordability. You can pick up a brand new GH5 for nearly less than $1,500. I want to say it's $1,200 for a camera without the lens. That's insane. But here comes the thing about the S5. I didn't buy this camera because of video. As I was kind of mentioning earlier, I wasn't taking pictures with my GH5, and that was just because I didn't like the fact that I had to go through extra work to get the photo edited. I was super satisfied with the video that the camera was making, but the photo quality just wasn't there. That's why I was super excited for the S5, because I knew I was going to be able to get photos out of this that I would be really satisfied with. This can't be a replacement to the GH5 because of the video limitations that this has. And don't get me wrong, there are some actually great features on this camera that I wish the GH5 had. I can plug in a battery bank into the USB-C port on the S5 and it'll just charge it up while I'm recording. But for pictures over the GH5, this just has way less noise. It's dual ISO, so you're able to get much nicer photos in low light, but forget low light, just in regular daylight. It being a full frame sensor versus a micro four thirds sensor is the one thing that I haven't mentioned yet that is absolutely game changing. Honestly, the S5 feels like it's in its own category because I don't feel like it's replacing anything. It's not replacing the G9, it's not replacing the GH5 or the GH5S. It's its own new camera that I think Lumix should have put out first before the S1 or the S1R. I mean, I thought about getting the S1 or the S1R, but it just didn't feel right, and let alone the fact that it's even bigger than this. It just didn't seem like the right camera for anyone who was using the GH line, because the GH5S still works great, and you'd be going to a camera that at the time didn't have many lenses available for it. And now the S5 just fills in that gap. $2,000, you get a fantastic camera that offers you pretty much almost everything that the GH5 has, but with a full frame sensor. Even though it doesn't have all of the video features that the GH5 has, the one catch that I think makes it all okay is the fact that you can eventually, I don't have one, I'm going to get one eventually, get a Ninja 5, record to an SSD, and get back everything plus more than you could do on the GH5, because you could even shoot in RAW video with the Ninja 5. I definitely look forward to testing that out once I get my hands on one. Here's the fun part. I can't recommend it to nearly anybody because of the fact that you have to work for it and it doesn't work for you. And the best way that I can explain it, and what everybody kind of already knows, is the fact that Panasonic's autofocus is just not reliable. And for anybody who's coming from the GH5, that's really the only people that I can recommend it to, or people that have been using the GH line for a while now, because they already know all of the weird things about the GH5, GH5S, G9. See, for photo, it's absolutely fantastic. The autofocus grabs where I want it to be every single time. But for video, it's still the same deal. The autofocus has improved a little bit. I've tested this out on the Sigma 24-70 2.8. I tested it out on the kit lens that it came with. I tested it out on the Lumix 24-70. It's still the same. It hasn't gotten better. And to me, it's not a big deal, because I'm shooting in manual focus. I learned shooting in autofocus is just, it's just not a thing for the GH5, and it's still the same thing for the S5. I've become okay with that, but any of my photographer or videographer friends, most of them are shooting on Sonys. And when the rest of the world is used to Canon dual pixel and Sony's great autofocus as well, I just can't recommend the camera to anyone because that's just such a learning curve for some people who are so used to autofocus. And at the end of the day, it is what it is, and sure, some people will get past it and learn it. It's just not a camera that I can recommend to someone who is used to the camera working for them, and that's the best way that I can explain it. So at the end of the day, who is this camera for? To me, this camera is for that person who's been using the GH5, GH5S, or even the G9, maybe even the G85, and they are ready for an upgrade, but they are still super satisfied with everything that Lumix has to offer, and you're okay with making the sacrifice that you're still not going to be getting any good autofocus out of the camera. For video, for photo, as I mentioned, it's still pretty good. Again, this isn't really a review on the camera. This was just me kind of talking about what it really is, what it's kind of good at, what it's not so good at. But if you have any questions about the camera, feel free to drop them in the comments below, and I'll try and get back to you guys as soon as I can. At the end of the day, though, it is still a phenomenal camera, even though I can't recommend it to everybody. If you are willing to work with it when it pushes back, you won't be disappointed. So that's pretty much it. Again, not a review, just kind of going through my thoughts, initial thoughts on the camera. If you want to see a review, let me know in the comments below. If you have any other questions or anything, or you thought this was the stupidest video on earth, let me know down below. If you liked the video, you know what to do. If you didn't like the video, you also know what to do. But other than that, that's pretty much been it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.